tried Pitfalls. I was a Node Ops team lead. Node Ops for us was like operations, monitoring, deployment. I'm a Node core contributor. There's lots of us now, which is great. Node's doing really well. At StrongLoop, and now I work at IBM. You can contact me. I'm friendly. So I'm going to start a disclaimer, particularly for this. I mean, this is my opinion. And this is kind of part of the point of my talk, is that it's my opinion, but there's lots of opinions. So there's an interactive component to this. I know it's kind of late in the evening. Quick test. Everybody with the right arm, raise it. That's discouraging. Let's go for the left. Come on. I mean, I know not everybody in the world has left arms, but I think everyone here does. Okay, so there's going to be some quizzes here. Let's see how it goes. Who's called process.next tick here? Most people are new developers, is what I saw. That's it? Okay. Well, here's a quick question. So this is just it's not clear. I'm jumping right into this. I'm just going to talk about some Node APIs. No more introductions. So process.next tick. So we'll call process.next tick, give it function A. Question is, what is it called? Is it called in the next tick of the event loop? Or is it called immediately after the current stack returns? So next tick of the event loop, everybody thinks it's there? Nobody. Why is it not thinks here? Yeah, no, of course not. It's called immediately after the current stack returns. So, okay, well there's another function called setImmediate. That's cool. So there's that question. SetImmediate. Is it called in the next tick of the event loop or immediately after the current stack returns? So next tick, anybody for next tick? Okay. Immediately after the current stack returns? No? Wow, you guys are good. So yeah, of course SetImmediate doesn't call it immediately, it calls it the next tick, right? Obviously. What's going on? This would strike many people as crazy. It certainly struck me as crazy. So, and it's basically historical baggage in Node.js. Next tick adds callbacks to a queue. That queue is cleared immediately, as it happens. Some reason, I guess, came from the browser, and it has a kind of a different semantic, and it happens on the next tick. So anyone who's worked with Node for a while knows this. It's just kind of how it is, and we all kind of like shrug our shoulders and laugh about it and whatever. But if you're new to Node, it's really confusing when you have APIs that do the exact opposite of what they say they are. And this is not so great. So that's, but what can we do about it? Actually, it's kind of an open question. I don't know if there's anything we can do about it. We break a lot of code. I mean, sure, new ES features break things sometimes, but you're just kind of switching that and the world will fall down. Okay, so I'm going to move on to another thing. I've worked a lot with, because I work with Node Ops and deployment stuff, I work a lot with the Node cluster module. And the Node cluster module is not one of the finest pieces of Node. It gets some stuff done, it's useful, it can be very powerful, and it was done a long time ago, and in retrospect, maybe some of its API decisions didn't make sense. So I'm going to just walk you through this quick little example code. So you require a cluster. What cluster does is it spawns out child processes, and those child processes symmetrically listen on any port. So standard, HTTP application, every worker will open port, say port 80, and they'll all be listening on port 80, and then requests will go into any of the available workers. So that's kind of what it's for. You can do lots of other things with it. So basically, if you're the master, we're going to fork off a child. Once the child's online, we're going to kill it. We're going to send it the signal safe hub. And if it exited, we're going to say, hey, it exited. And the child, that's the else branch, we're going to listen for the safe hub signal. If we see it, we're going to log up and not doing anything. So, quiz time. So in this code, what's going to get printed to the console? Are we going to see hub? Are we going to see exit? Are we going to see hub and exit? Or are we going to see no output at all? Okay, well, who's for hub? No hubs? Okay. Really? What about exit? Are we going to see some exits? Okay, a couple exits. Hub and exit? Everybody else is baffled? Does this example not make sense? Or you're just like, what could this possibly do? It's going to be confusing. Okay. Well, if you kill a child, it's just going to exit. It's not. I mean, you sent this signal to your child, sig help. You wrote this code that listened for the signal, sig help, and you never got it. This is weird. It's really weird, actually. And the reason is because the way worker.kill is implemented, it first disconnects the child, which will almost always cause it to exit, because disconnects causes it to close all of its open TCP sockets, its listening sockets, and then exit, because it's Node. It's, if you're not listening, not doing anything, bye-bye, you go away. And after it's disconnected, we send the signal. Well, that pretty much guarantees that the child process will never get the signal. And I was like, at least a handful of bug reports in Node.js about this. People are like, listen for the signal, sent the signal, didn't get the signal, well, what's going on? This is particularly strange if you work with the cluster API, because the cluster API is mostly symmetric with the child process API. It's like a different kind of child process. So that means child process has a .send, you can send messages to your child process. Worker has a .send, you can send messages to your child process. It does exactly the same thing. There's a worker .on message for getting messages back. Works exactly the same. I mean, you can picture the source code. It's actually like worker.prototype.send equals child process.prototype.send. It's exactly the same. But kill, surprisingly, it's subtly different in a kind of unfortunate way. It's really confusing. I could go on and on about cluster. There's a bunch of things that annoy me about it. But I'll talk about one more thing. So suicide. Suicide has many. It's a pretty harsh word to stick into an API. But I'm not going to talk about that specifically. I'm going to talk about this code here. So here, I'm going to fork a child. And once it's online, I'm going to kill it. And, so the important point about here is that once workers have exited, there's a property called suicide. And suicide's a Boolean. It's either set, it's either true or false. So the game here is, if we kill our child, did it commit suicide? Right? So votes for suicide being true. You guys are cowards. Come on. Yes, okay. So, no, of course not. It's, when you kill your child, of course it's suicide, right? Okay, well, let's change this around. Let's rewrite the thing. We're just gonna fork our child, and our child is once it's running, it's gonna immediately exit. It's gonna kill itself. So this is suicide, right? Yes? Yes? Anybody? No? No, this is absolutely not suicide. Killing yourself isn't suicide. So, what's actually going on here? So this word, it's really hard to name things. Was it Egyptian? So there's only two difficult problems in computer science, and one of them is naming things. So basically, what it means is orderly exit. It's an attempt on the part of the cluster module to distinguish between workers that exited because they were requested to exit, like they made an explicit request themselves, they called process.disconnect, or the parent made an explicit request to disconnect the worker. And if that happens, and then the worker exits, that's nice and orderly. We intended that to happen. The process, exited, it was process death, and it was intentional, therefore it's suicide. So I get why they use the word suicide in a way. But you just saw the last two examples. The impact is just like, what? So, but it is a useful concept, and it's also kind of a difficult concept to wrap our head around. So this was honestly very coincidental, but I gave this talk a little while ago, and I happened to do it just at the point where people just kind of realized this was crazy for many reasons. I also objected to the name in the API, and I have lots of other things. But my principal objection is it means exactly the opposite of what the word means, and that's a problem. So it's actually gotten renamed now. This particular API problem, it's still available for backwards compatibility. Good, won't break your code. But it's now called exited after disconnect, which is a bit of a mouthful, but actually describes what it does. So hands down an improvement. I'll go through one other thing. So this is URL.parent. Yeah, I was originally going to have this be just a cluster trivia test, and I was going to try and get like the Node core contributors, like all 6 of them at that time, to answer the questions in public, having never seen them. But I thought that was cool, and none of them would agree to it, so we didn't do that. So maybe less informative as well. So URL.parse format. So the game here is we have a URL, and we want to change the host part of the URL to IBM.com. So we're going to straightforward code. We call URL.parse. We get an object. We change the host to IBM.com. We format the URI again, nice kind of thing, and we log it. So the question is, are we going to see http://ibm.com for 8088/path? Yes. Anybody? No? Everybody else says no? Everybody else says no? Sorry? Yeah, no way. It won't do that. Okay. So once you poke around a little bit of the API, what you'll see is that the host is the pair, example.com:8080. It's the 2 of them together, and host name is example.com. It's a little bit weird, but I just assumed that whoever wrote the code based it on the RFC, and the BNF and the RFC happened to do this, and it basically was kind of consistent or whatever. But I looked up the RFC just to verify, and none of the RFC doesn't do it like this at all. So it's just kind of how it is. So no problem. We see that the host name is example.com, so let's write this code again. URL.parse, boom, set the host name to IBM.com. Question now, will it print IBM.com :8080/path? Yes? No? Who knows? Okay. Yeah, no way. It prints that. Like, it doesn't do anything about it, doesn't change it at all. I mean, obviously it did something. So what's going on? So the deal is host name and port are ignored if host is present. Okay. No problem. We'll just rewrite this. So we'll delete URI.host. We'll set the host name to IBM.com. We'll format it. We got our code. That wasn't so hard, kind of. But one wonderful thing about Node in the last year, there's a bunch of good things, is that we actually have a bunch of people now who actually care about the documentation and that it describes how Node works and is useful. And Chris Dickinson is doing great stuff on that, and James Snell basically rewrote 3 major parts of the documentation. It's actually probably the best way for him to have learned in detail those parts of the API. So, but it is truly a great way, and it also is a great service. It's much better. So, but this still isn't documented actually. The example, there's only an example in the docs, and you wouldn't be able to guess this. So I'd like to see it. This is how I think it should work. I would expect port to be 8080. Host port to be example 8080, that is what it says in the RFC, and port, the example to be the host. And I would expect the individual bits to be preferred over the kind of the global blob, so you can kind of change them, because those are the parts you most often want to change, not the whole thing. But it's not like that, and you can imagine this is. Maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't. Maybe everybody here thinks this is, how it is perfectly predictable. But clearly, if we change this, much code would break. This would not be so great, or maybe it would be. So that last thing here, this way I won't rant for everybody. So path.parse, path.format. So again, this is a new Node.js API. Recently done. Kind of symmetrical with URL.parse and format. You've got a path.parse. If you look at it, you've got a .name, you've got a .extension, which are what you would expect, index and .text. So let's change the extension to .html. Life is good. We log it. So under index.html, we're going to get it. Yes? No? Thumbs down? Okay. Yeah, no way. So what we get is some index.text. Okay. But we just saw URL.parse, so there's certain API patterns going on here, that's no problem. Now that we've learned this stuff, we've learned it. So we read it. So, and there is in fact a base that is index.text, the 2 things together. So cool, we just read the code, delete bits.base, set bits.extension, voila. So, yes, worked? Didn't work? Sorry? It just does that. Okay. So what's going on here? So it's just completely different. The format always ignores name and extension. It just doesn't. I don't know. There's not. I don't know how this slipped in. Stuff happens. I mean, it's a new API. It should not have been like this. So, I mean, it is what it is. Okay, streams, V1, 2, and 3. I'm not actually going to talk about streams. Streams are a rat's nest of backwards incompatibility to Node.06. I mean, for good reason. I mean, there were some problems. They needed to be improved. Isaac Schluter was really. There've been a lot of breaking Node changes. Apparently, I wasn't around in the Node.06 days. 0.10 was released just after I started working with Node. So people apparently were a little bit frustrated at every once in a while there'd be a new Node release and nothing would work again. So he really committed to stability, which is fair. But we went through 3 versions of Node, and we're now looking like piling on slightly unstable hacks on top of hacks. I mean, how long do we have to be, running and be compatible with Node 0.8? Is anybody here? Certainly nobody's coding against it. But does anybody have Node 0.8 in production here? Okay. Well, 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was still 7 or 8% of estimates. It's hard to tell if Node production site was still 0.8. It was the first apparently really stable, good version of Node. 0.10, anybody 0.10 in production? Couple? Yeah, sometimes quality release. 0.12, do people still do that? Kind of about the same as 0.10. What about 4x? In production? More? 5x? Live on the edge? Yes, some 5x's, good for you. 6.x? A couple of X. So there's really, you see there's a real, I don't know if you can see that, there's a smattering across all the different Node versions, which is why it's great you actually care about making your Node stuff work. I appreciate that. So, so this is it's not, maybe it's fine, maybe it's not to knock Node's API, but the question here is, what kind of Node do you want? A good one or backwards compatible one? That's what I think. I personally, I'm saying, I would like to see Node break compatibility occasionally. I'm okay with that. I want it to be obviously better, some sort of advertisement, but I'm okay if Node gets better. Because, and for a number of reasons, there's some languages, and I'm not going to pick out names, who I feel have never fixed ancient mistakes, and they just get worse and worse with time. And I don't want Node to die as it gets worse and worse with time. The other reason is, look at this, 30% of registered Node in-game accounts less than 6 months old. Now, this was from, a little while ago. But that's a huge number of people becoming Node developers. So all of us who've internalized the process.next set immediate thing, Java and L ribs, funny, kind of. All of these new Node developers are what? So the pain of people learning and having to learn and walk through this and look at the path thing and the URL thing and be like, what's going on here? I think outweighs the pain of us occasionally being like, okay, these things are just obviously not how it should be. Let's change it. Now that's clearly my opinion, right? Not everybody has that opinion. I was sitting beside a guy, anyhow, I'm going to get a full name. But there are some people who want Node never to break anything ever again, period. People who, this is, and I don't mean just some random guy on Twitter. So people who are reasonably credible, experienced Node people are firm on that. But the one thing you should understand, everybody who is working with Node is, like many people, Node collaborators don't really like to be yelled at. They don't really like have terrible tweets sent their way. It's kind of unpleasant. Even some people do it for free. Some people are paid by companies and also do it for fun. And some whatever. But whoever you are, most people do not like being yelled at. There's a few who really thrive in that. But so when someone breaks and the internet explodes and people yell at them, and it's bad, or us, let's avoid that in the future. But I guess I would ask anybody who ever is, up on some new Node release and something didn't work, before you burst out the flame guns, ask yourself, did it get better? I don't broke my code, and it kind of suffered the last 8 hours figuring it out. But is it better? Did I just miss the change log? Because if it did, I mean, maybe some kudos in the GitHub issue tracker would be nice. I have never once seen a Node issue open said, by the way, that last release was amazing. I mean, it's, people do, I mean, maybe that sounds funny, but you know, I don't think people will be upset. It might be closed pretty frequently, but I think people will be happy. And not that I'm encouraging everybody to do that. I mean, if there's like a, you know, 80 issues like that, we're having trouble tomorrow. But what you say does affect people. And also, I mean, if you really think changes are made and they're not, you know, they really are, you know, not making it better, speak out. If you thought it made sense before and it's not helping, speak out. But if you are going to complain about it, at least make sure that you're not, you know, you really think that, and you're not complaining about things being made better. And that's, yeah, that's my talk. Maybe I should ask the questions. Are there other questions? No? Oh.
What's the, and I know a little bit about this, but what's the internal process for going from suggestions to the API to actually implementing them to actually releasing them?
So the process is not an internal process, it's an external process, right? It's on GitHub. So the question is, what's the process for getting changes or anything? It's a GitHub project. If you like something, if you think something's a bug, you'd like something to change, you can open an issue. If some developer who feels like it wants to fix your issue, they will. But it is, and you know, if it's a bug, that'll probably happen. If it's just something you'd like to happen, yeah, not so much, probably. So the best way to get something like new into Node Core, I mean, is really to PR it, particularly with bad code, just to see if people like it or if they rewrite it. I mean, Node, not all things are appropriate in the core. There's debate about what should or should not be in Node Core, but you know, after debate, people have legitimately different ideas about how large the core should be, what makes it. But basically, yeah, it's issue trackers. And the process, there is a deprecation process. Now, you had a really nice diagram of it in the last talk, of the LTS process and all that. So there is a formal process. So if something is going to change, at this point, it needs to be deprecated for at least one LTS, and then it can be actually removed in the next LTS. There's been a real reluctance still to actually remove things unless it has a real maintenance burden. Even things that everybody in Node Core despises, like domains, are still there. But it just, you know, file system?
File system API.
Oh, really? I don't know the file system API. I'm an engineering systems programmer. I looked at it, I was like, yep, exactly what I expected.
A lot of it is deprecated, but that's not.
Oh, there's only one thing that was deprecated. That was the FS that exists. SAMS?
Well, yeah, that's changed.
Maybe changed a little bit. Anyhow, other questions?
Yeah, I was just wondering, right? You run into all these issues, URL and stuff like that. It's like, why do you need to solve it? Why don't you just read the code and probably find out the issue?
So I'm one of those people. So the question is, why didn't I just read the code and find out? Well, I'm a developer too. Like I actually read docs. Call me crazy. So I read the docs, I write the code, and when the code doesn't work, I look at the docs again, and then I read read the Node code, and then I know how it works. So like every one of those problems, I did not like harvest, Node.js issues. Every single one was something I personally spent some of my precious life on.
So to follow up with that question, looks like some of the internal state of that particular object is exposed to developers to using JavaScript. Whenever you have a problem, most likely it's public, and they start to begin the replication against that particular property, it then end up influence your overall state. Okay? So is that kind of a warning sign or some kind of bad design relation happening in that state?
So the question is the fact that there's in the URL and the parse that there's these intermediate objects, is that a leak of internal state. I mean, I looked at the history, but I can't necessarily know the thinking of the people who wrote it. I actually think that it's not leaking of internal state. It's that when you parse something, different people want different representations. Like if you just give just the host name and just the port, people who just want to take those two together, like the port and the have to concatenate it. Like for file names, I mean, wanting to use the entire file name, the name and the extension at the same time, we just want to do that all the time. But there's also times we want the base name and the extension. So there's legitimate decisions you have to make when reversing that. Given that there is duplication of state in the object, there's like the conglomerate object and the two broken up, you have to make a choice. How are you going to do it? I would just argue that one API made the wrong choice, and the other API didn't even bother thinking about it. That's what it looked like to me. So I don't actually think it's a state leaking problem. It's that good?